We'll start with obviously talking about the tour. So catalogue, the hits, tour. Is it what it says on the tin? What can people expect? Is it just going to be the best of the best from the past?
It's kind of hard to say, actually. I mean, I think you get pressurized into doing a greatest hits tour, and I thought, well, I don't really want to do that. So catalog kind of covered everything to me, and it gives me a scope, I think, that I can look back over my entire career and cherry pick what to play. So I'm not just not just stuck with Ultravox and solo and the stuff that people know, the Visage stuff and whatever. But I can delve into maybe a bit of Rich Kids. I can delve into a little bit of maybe Thin Lizzy or whatever. So yes, there'll be certain songs that people will expect to hear.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm just alienating my audience. But equally so, there'll be things, maybe people's favourite tracks from album tracks or whatever, or B-sides or whatever. So, but again, trying to get the balance right so that I'm satisfied, the audience is satisfied, and the 50% of the people out there in the dark who've been dragged along by their significant other halves who don't know any of your stuff besides the big hits,
Yeah.
that they are satisfied as well, that what you're playing is still going to be entertaining to them, not just, they won't be just sitting looking at the phones for an hour and a half or whatever.
Yeah. So the set's going to be sort of transcending genres in a way, isn't it? It's going to be
Yeah, but that's
from what
my
you just
entire
mentioned.
entire career has been a bit of that, hasn't it? I started off in a pop band, and
Mm.
um, and you get categorized. It's very easy for certainly the media to try and put you on a shelf like a book in a library and go, well, that's what you are. And certainly when that happens when you're young, it's very difficult to grow out of that or be allowed to grow out of that. So over the years, I've kind of swum upstream and gone against the norm, I
Yeah.
suppose. Buying a synthesizer in 1978 when I was in the Rich Kids, who were a guitar band, in order to try and make a sound that eventually made with Ultravox, or
Yeah.
just putting Visage together, joining Ultravox through Visage, doing a stint with Thin Lizzy in the middle of all of that. It's
Mm.
kind of genre defying in a way. And
Yeah.
that's not a bad thing to have.
No, so it kind of tests the boundaries. Do you think that was something personal in terms of experimentation, or was it to avoid being pigeonholed in a way?
I think it was. I think it was a definite reaction against becoming known or commercially successful for a very short period with a band that I had very with music that I had very little to do with.
Yeah.
No matter what. I don't think I'd delved back into Slick, which was in 1976 with the number one record. I didn't write it. I didn't produce it, and truth be told, I wasn't allowed to play on it. So it was a direct, a reaction to that, and everything I've done since then is the antithesis of that. Where I produced it, or I wrote it, or I played all the instruments on it, or I did whatever. And maybe that's, yeah, I know. I feel like I'm talking to psychiatrists now. Maybe that's me kind of wanting the pat on the back, the recognition. Maybe that's what it was that started me doing that. I don't need recognition now at all,
No.
but maybe back then the first thing you do when you come out of that is the opposite, and you want to be able to do it the way you want to do it, as opposed to the way other people want you to do it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you touch on kind of the recognition element because you've always seemed quite level-headed, grounded, and always been given, well,
Oh, I've had my moments.
yeah. But in quite a few interviews, it comes across quite modest, and you're always kind of pushing it onto other people. It's a group effort kind of vibe. But is now this tour and maybe the Albert Hall show as well, is it a chance to really reflect on how successful you've been?
I think it's there's I think there's an awareness that the hourglass is running out. Without being morbid about it, but it is. It's when you start out in this industry, everything's uphill, everything's away in the distance. It's all on the horizon, and you're running towards that horizon, whatever that might be. Well, I think I passed the horizon a long time back, and you start to think, well, okay, I'm going to be selective about what I choose to do, and if that means something like the Albert Hall, you know, when they said, well, what do you want to do for your 70th? And I thought, well, what I always do, I'd like to be on stage doing this, a little seismic moment in my life. And that was quite a, maybe selfish isn't the word, but it was quite personal doing the Albert Hall, because I covered a lot of things that I thought was interesting. So I did a little string quartet thing at the beginning. I walked on stage and did the first song on my own with an acoustic guitar, which is the opposite of what you'd expect to do in somewhere like that. I didn't invite millions of guests to come along and do stuff with me. So I cherry picked what we would perform and how we would perform it. And it kind of solidified the idea of doing this tour. That, yeah, if you're going to go out there and look at your past, look at your catalogue, look at the works you've done, great. You know, why I for the first time ever, if I choose to go up and do The Boys Are Back in Town by Thin Lizzy, I can do that without having to justify it to anyone, because it's a part of my past. So it was kind of enlightening in a way, to come to the conclusion that this is something that I wanted to do now. I'm not saying I'll do this for the rest of my life. You know, I may go back and look at, you know, doing an entire album and it's, you know, from start to finish again, maybe an Ultravox thing or a solo thing or a bit of both. But for now, this seems to make sense to me.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting you spoke about choosing, sort of doing it the way you want to do, because I was looking through the dates, I think, and there's some very aesthetically pleasing venues, shall we say, on the tour. So have you cherry picked quite a lot of those? Have you gone through maybe places you've not played before that you've wanted to?
I would love to say yes, but the answer is absolutely not. You know, there are so many factors involved in putting a tour together. You know, the agent has to find a route that kind of works. Although that doesn't always happen. And he has to find availability in venues. You know, the one thing that we said was, okay, after the last tour, let's do less dates, but do slightly different venues, go more theatres, something that's comfortable for people. You know, there's an element of acknowledging that your audience is of a certain age as well. Not all of them. You know, it's great to see that, you know, music has survived because of the internet and because of games and streaming services and all of that. You know, movies and whatever, your music's used, and it's appealed to a younger audience. So you still get a new, fresh audience coming in, but your older audience is getting older, like you are, and you have this dilemma where half the audience wants to get up and dance, and half the audience want to sit down and watch it in comfort and just listen to it, let it wash over them. So we chose venues that might be able to do both. The dancing element of it is entirely down to the venue. So we try to find venues that might be a bit more lenient, as if someone in their mid-50s is going to get up and trash the seats because they're dancing in the aisles. It's not really going to happen, is it? You know, but so you've got all of these elements you have to take into consideration when you're putting a tour together.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you've spoke about how you kind of cut your teeth on the live scene, like long before you went into recording as well. So you've probably owed it a lot to Grassroots venues, but so how do you feel now where maybe they're being overlooked and they're kind of struggling to keep open in many cases?
You know what? The grassroots venues are incredibly important. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and I'm not saying it's the venue's fault, but the venues that used to be out there that young new bands could go out and cut their teeth, go and play on a Tuesday night when nobody was going there or whatever. You know, you'd read in the back of the NME or the Melody Maker or whatever, you know, who was going on tour. And it was the same venues, it was like pubs and clubs and small venues that seem to be falling by the wayside right now. And when that level of touring started to kind of dry up because audiences didn't really want to go to sticky carpeted clubs anymore for whatever reason, because it goes through phases, you know, what's cool to play and where's not cool to play. And when that started to dry up, what they did was they started jumping on the bandwagon with, you know, tribute bands. So instead of having a new band coming out and doing a 3-week tour of the UK, playing these places on a midweek when it was really quiet and they maybe get, you know, 100 people coming to see a new band, the venues, a lot of them, not all of them, decided to go with no Oasis or some tribute band, T-Rex to say or whatever. Nothing.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with those bands,
No.
but they could get them in on a Tuesday night, and all the students could go and see it for like a fiver, and the venue would make a lot of money at the bar.
Yeah.
So they were struggling trying to keep the venues open. So fiscally, it was better for them to use a lot of the tribute bands, which would bring in a lot of people at a low cost and generate income for them. But it meant that those venues were closed and off limits to a lot of the new bands who were out there doing it.
Yeah.
Luckily, artists are quite clever people, and in a way, it's like they're like animalistic. They will find a route. So they've found routes through social media of building an audience where they can maybe bypass a lot of the smaller venues where you used to go and cut your teeth and learn how it all worked. But it's sad to see that there's still, small arts venues and stuff are still struggling to try and bring not just music, but, dance and theatre and all of that and keep it going. There's no funding for it.
No, agreed. It's frustrating. In those early days, because as I just touched on, you said that you were more about the live than recording. Do you mean you were just out playing covers, maybe, or were you not even thinking about writing or forging a career out of it at that point?
Well, there is no, and I'm sure there still isn't. There is nowhere you go to learn how to write a song. You can go to music college and the places up and down the country that are meant to kind of fine hone it, but unless you have a grasp of what it is you actually want to do, there is no school for learning how to write. So the way you survived back in Scotland when I was a kid, when you were out in your band, you had to play cover versions, you had to play dance halls, you had to stand. There were no venues where you could charge entrance fee because the church ran the licensing laws, and you weren't allowed to charge entrance to a pub to go and see a band. So Scotland had no pub rock circuit like you had in England. We kept reading about all these pub rock places, the Nashville and whatever in London, the Angel Islington, all these places that have 7 nights a week, they'd have major bands coming through playing every night. And we didn't have that. So we had to become human jukeboxes in order to play. But while you were doing that, you were trying to slip in the odd, original song. But like most first songs you write, they were very derivative of who you were listening to at the time. So you'd write something that sounded a bit like David Bowie. You'd write something that sounded a bit like Roxy Music. And it was accepted by your audience, but it was never going to get you, a record deal. And Scotland was a kind of musical desert in that respect. We didn't have that infrastructure, not until 1977, 78, when indie labels started to appear, and you could survive. You could be signed in Scotland when it became indie. Everything prior to that was London centric.
Yeah, no, but it still is in some ways, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah.
But you obviously mastered the songwriting eventually, regardless of the difficulties coming through. I'm going to touch on a couple of them, and one of them is obviously Vienna, which is a huge hit for yourself. I remember hearing it for the first time when I was a kid. I was on my mum's old iPod. It was one of the really old versions, and I was scrolling through.
The dial,
And
the circular dial.
That one. And I remember listening to it and just being absolutely blown away, thinking, "Wow." I'm interested to hear your thoughts on when you realised how big a hit that was going to be.
Well, we didn't, to be brutally honest. We knew it was a special song when we were recording. We did the entire album in 3 weeks. And when we were recording the tracks, I think we mixed it out at Connie Plank's studio in Germany, but we recorded the tracks in London at Rack Studios. And at the end of each night, as you do a kind of rough mix at the end of a session, just to kind of vibe yourself up, as you're waiting on your taxi to take you home or whatever at the end of a long day, we'd put on, the 2 or 3 tracks that you had rough mixes of that. And every time we played Vienna, we kind of went, "Oh wow, that's something special." We didn't see it as a single. It was too long and too slow and speeds up and didn't fit any of the formats that radio ever might play. And it wasn't until it was, I think it was a station up north started playing late night music, album tracks and things, and they played Vienna a couple of times when the album came out, and someone from Chrysalis, the record label, heard it on the radio and said, "Oh God, you've got to think about doing this." And the head of the label came and saw us playing in London at the Hammersmith Odeon, as it was then. And when we played Vienna, the place went into meltdown, and it was just an album track. So
Yeah.
he saw 3,500, 4,000 people just standing up and waving their arms and getting lost in the moment.
Mm.
And he said, "We have to do something." But they wanted us to edit it down. And we said, "No, it's what it is. It's a piece of music.
Yeah.
It starts, it finishes, and it's 4 minutes long. You have to just put it out there and see what happens." And radio luckily picked up on it.
Yeah. And the rest is history, I suppose. So they wanted you to make it more radio friendly, and you
Well, it was too long. Radio wasn't playing anything over like 3 minutes.
yeah.
And that's just said, well, would you want to cut out the intro? That's quite important, or the
Yeah.
or the violin solo, the viola solo. Do you want to cut that out? Because that's quite important as well.
The whole beauty of the song is the way it builds.
Yeah, of course, it's a structure. It's what it is.
Yeah.
It's a piece of music. You can't just hack it to bits.
No, well, I'm glad you stood firm on that one. Obviously, another big hit. Not the time of year to talk about it, but have to ask you about "Do They Know It's Christmas," Band Aid, Live Aid, and everything that came with it. How do you feel about that song now when you hear it? What does it make you feel?
It's not the best song in the world, and I've said that for nearly 40 years now. But as a record, it works really well, and I can say that because I did it. It works. It did its job brilliantly. You have this very difficult song to write. Bob was responsible for the majority of the lyrics, including, "And tonight, thank God it's them instead of you." It's a difficult line to try and put across and for people to understand.
Yeah.
And he's explained it many times. It's not "thank God it's happening to them." It's "thank God it's not happening to you." And it's a difficult song to try and capture because it starts with the clanging chimes of doom, this bell, this ominous, film-esque drone, my voice doing all the all that multi-track stuff that I did. And then finishes with this massive sing-along, feed the world thing. And it's a wedge. There is no chorus. It starts really thin and small and then builds up this big thing at the end. So it was a tall order to try and pull off. So as a record, it worked brilliantly. As a song, it wasn't great. We've written, both Bob and I, individually and separately, have written better things. But as a result, for the problem, as an antidote for the problem, it did its job brilliantly.
Yeah. And do you ever become disassociated with any of your big hits? Do you ever feel like they've taken on a life of their own from when you wrote them?
But they do. They do, and thank God they do. It's like, yes, are there times when you think, God, I can't sing Vienna again, I can't sing Dance with Tears in My Eyes again. Until you're standing on stage and then you play one of those and you see the entire audience react, because it means so much to them. And it's reminiscent of, you're talking about trying to keep your feet in the ground and trying to be sensible about what you do in your life. It takes me back to when I was a kid going to see bands, and the moment the house lights went down and all you're looking at on stage is a blacked out stage with little red lights, and it's the lights in the front of the amplifier. And the moment that light went out, it meant that someone was walking on stage. And the excitement of that was massive, massive. And you've got to remember that's what your audience is feeling. When they hear, Vienna or Dancing or If I Was or Reap the Wild Wind or any of those songs, it means something to them in their life. A seismic moment has happened that was the soundtrack to. And you cannot forget that. So when you think, oh, okay, I'm getting a bit tired of it, just shake it up a little bit. Change the arrangement a bit, find an interesting way that still enthuses you to perform it. But don't just miss it out, because the majority of people are there because of those songs.
Yeah. Arctic Monkeys spring to mind when you say that. They kind of fell out of love with their early record, and now they come out with these new arrangements.
Yeah,
of
you've
it
got
just
to
to give it to the
and
fans.
change it up a bit, and
Yeah,
that's what I've done them acoustically. I've done them with orchestras, and every time you do it, you think, okay, it kind of works. You just make it, you adapt it.
yeah. And we're almost out of time, but I was going to ask you all about kind of modern music consumption and whether you're happy with kind of the time you broke through. But rather than go into all that, I'm going to ask you about any new music kind of suggestions, who you enjoy recently, maybe some new artists.
It's funny. I don't listen to music in a normal sense of any normal person does. I when I hear music, I analyze it, and I shouldn't, and I wish I couldn't. But
Mm,
I do. I break it
yeah,
down to its component parts. After all these years of producing records, I hear
mm,
the elements rather than the overall effect. So I don't listen to music the same way I used to. And when I do listen to music, I tend to listen to it in the car, which isn't sonically the best thing to do, but it's when I'm least disrupted by the telephone or people talking to me or whatever. And I tend to listen to a lot. Right now, I'm listening to a lot of music coming out of Iceland. I'm listening to a lot of
okay.
neoclassical composers, I suppose they'd be Sigur Rós and
Oh
Ulfur
yeah.
Arnalds and stuff like that.
Mm,
So that's my go-to stuff. It's almost filmic music. It's film music for me, and I don't analyze that as much as I do rock or pop music.
yeah.
And if I'm feeling nostalgic, I'll still put on a bit of Peter Gabriel or a bit of David Bowie or a bit of Kate Bush or whatever stuff that I used to listen to.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I think we've came to the end now, but thanks very much for your time. I could have gone on for ages, to be honest. Much appreciated
Well,
for your
let's
time.
do it again when you've got your mic working.
I will do. I will do. Did it hold up throughout?
It was absolutely fine. I heard everything perfectly. Yeah.
It's not up to mic quality. I think it's just been going through the laptop, and I've had this mic here like a stooge. I don't know, but yeah. Thank you very much, James.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.